Right, quick demo of my NodeRED Zapier integration. So we've got NodeRED here running on a Raspberry Pi, you can see below me. Main reason for that is it gives me the Sense hat on the Pi, so I've got a couple of input outputs. It's just a nice demo. So I've got a couple of flows set up here already with the Sense hat, and we can inject a payload and a topic with a color. We'll move the topic into message.color and that'll scroll across the sense hat. These two just send a couple of commands to set up the rotation and things. So if I send that in now, you'll see it comes through very bright. I don't know why. I think maybe that was it's still just quite bright on the camera. And that's scrolling hello in red, and if I change it, the topic to blue, similarly it'll scroll across saying hello in blue. Okay, so that's our basic output, and again, an input, we're just picking up the button events from the joystick and looking for when the state is a 1, so that's the pressing down on the event, and logging that out. So you can see if I press a button on the joystick, it sends some events there. Oops, and of course, pop-up notifications. So we've got our inputs and outputs. So what we're going to do now is wire this flow up to Zapier. So we have our package, which is here on my GitHub, NodeRED contrib Zapier. That gives us two new nodes, a trigger node and an action node, which are Zapier terms for basically an input and an output. So we kind of reversed in the NodeRED sense. So a trigger would go at the end of the flow because you'd trigger you do something and then you'd send it to a Zapier trigger, which would trigger the Zap, which would go off and log something to Google Docs or something like that, for example. And an action would be something happens in Zapier, and then the Zapier sends an action to NodeRED, which sends the data into the flow. So we'll start off with the action. First thing we want to do is create the auth. So Zapier config, tap there, and we just use a token. This token is just a string. It could be this is a token, or we can tap there and it'll just, every time we tap it, it'll generate a new UUID random string in the browser. So we'll use that as our token and a little copy to clipboard function. So we'll set up that token. We need to give our action a name. That's quite important. That's the key. So we'll call this one display because it's going to fire to the display, and we'll wire it in like that. While we're at it, we'll also do the same. Now what? I've got two tokens in here. DBE, that's the one we're using. It's easier to actually only have one token, but I should just delete that one. There we go. So, and this one is just going to be button, because we can use the keyboards as an action, as a trigger. So we'll create our trigger and our action. They're both set up with a token. The other thing I should point out is that obviously NodeRED needs to be exposed to the internet, the HTTP at port on here. So I'm using ngrok for this. So my Pi is listening out through ngrok on my own ngrok URL. So I'll deploy all of that. Now we'll go over into Zapier. So this is the Zapier dashboard, if you haven't seen before. A Zap is the kind of what they call a flow. So we create a new Zap. And we'll start off with the Zapier, the NodeRED action in Zapier. So we need a separate trigger for that. Zapier have quite a nice little thing called Push by Zapier, which is this little browser plugin I've got up here, which allows you to create a to trigger a Zap from your browser. It's quite useful for testing or even just for stuff there. So we can set up our fields, and they're going to be text and color, we're going to call them. And if I hit test trigger, what should happen now is this. Yep, I can find my Zap, and it'll appear in here, my color, red for that. So that triggers into the Zap, cool. So if I test the trigger now, it can find the data I've just sent it. That just means it's got some sample data to work with, really. So every time I trigger that, every time I click up there and enter a color and a text, it'll send it to this Zap. It also does things like gives you the web page and stuff. So now the action that we're going to use for this Zap, so this is going to be our NodeRED package. So we would search Can't sit there for NodeRED. It's invite only at the moment, but I can share the invite link in the README file. We only have one action, which is action, and we need to set up our NodeRED, configure our NodeRED account. So we'll actually add a new one. You would have seen it would ask you to create a new one. In here, we need to enter our token, which we've already put on the clipboard, and we need to enter the URL where our NodeRED is running without a slash, so just the base host name. We have a couple of hidden URL endpoints _Zapier. They are inside the package for that. So we'll add those. It'll make a test request just to make sure it can talk to NodeRED. So you need to make sure that you've got a node deployed with a token and that you've got the HTTP kind of path exposed before you test that. So we're set up. Now we're going to choose our node. So what it can do is it's now going off to NodeRED and saying, okay, what action nodes have you got created? And it finds it. So that uses the name there, display, and that's actually the node ID, 5AE, whatever. So if we look at our node, sure enough, yep, 5AE, that's our display node. So in theory, you could have multiple nodes with the same name, but you'd get confused because they're used in here on the node ID. And then what value we want to send as our payload. So we can map something through from the other one. So we're going to send our payload is going to be our value of text from our form. And we can also set the topic if we want to. So we'll set our topic to be our color. Continue. And we can do a test, and that will send a test action. And that's actually already triggered. You can see the Pi has received it. So we're done. And we just turn our Zap on. Cool. So going back now, so Zapier is set up. So every time I trigger this Zap up here, it will fire the action, and we'll see it come out through there. In fact, let's add another debug, just so we can see what it's doing. Complete message object. Put that on there. Right. So if I have my Zap, I forgot to name it, but hello NodeRED, and my color is going to be green. This is whatever the sense hat takes. I think it's kind of color names, or you can put hash values in and stuff as well. I send that, that goes up to Zapier, bing, and sure enough, you can see scrolling across the screen there, it was green, and that was the what was output from the action there of hello NodeRED and green. So yeah, pretty easy to send stuff and real time. Obviously, you would normally use Zapier to hook up to a more interesting service. So let's try that now. What we've got here is our sense hat and our keyboard button. So we're just going to use when the button is pressed, we send that button to Zapier. So we'll create another new Zap. This time it's going to be a trigger. So when this happens, NodeRED, when a NodeRED trigger is fired, we can use the same account credentials we've already set up because we're using the same token. Now it's going to find our button trigger node, and what we should see is if we've already sent something to that trigger, it's not been sent there, but if I go back up here, and press the keyboard, we get an error because it hasn't been turned on, of course. But if I pull in again now, there we go, NodeRED trigger B, topic joystick, payload is the key, enter, and the state. So it's taking that message payload and making it available in Zapier already. So now what do we want to do with that? Let's say now we're going to log it to Google Sheets, and we're going to create a row in a spreadsheet. I need to sign into Google Sheets. That's right, it's already remembering my Google account. Continue, and then this just asks for a whole bunch of things in Zapier. I've got some Zapier notifications spreadsheet, and then which tab of the sheet, and it's got a couple of column fields in that sheet. So if I go into my google.com, look into Google Sheets, it's called Zapier notifications call. yeah, it was this this one I was using something previously with phone calls, but we create another tab, say in the spreadsheet, called that NodeRED, and then we just want to say payload topic. That's our columns. We go back into Zapier, refresh the fields, add the NodeRED tab of the worksheet, and then that's got columns of payload and topic. And sure enough, we can map our payload and our topic that come from the, in that case we'll do the topic will be topic, but the payload wants to be one of the sub-values, just the key. So it's always going to be 1. And done. So now whenever that NodeRED trigger button is sent to Zapier, Zapier will add a row to this Google Sheet with the payload and the topic of the joystick. I can do a test, and what we should see is that puts something, yep, into my Google Sheet there already, enter and joystick. Okay, if we turn that back on, now that Zap is active, that's all active and listening on the hat. Delete those. Let's watch the spreadsheet. So if I press some buttons on the joystick, there we go, up, enter, right, that should be an up, down, takes a second or so, but this is obviously going through NodeRED, through Zapier, and into the Google Sheets API, so we can, that's pretty quick. There we go. So that's using NodeRED to connect with Zapier.